Most of us operate under a quiet assumption that our thoughts are simply internal reactions to the outside world. Like a clear pane of glass, we assume our mind is just observing what's already there until those invisible ideas begin to crystallize. Human cognition is incredibly aggressive. The moment you process an idea, it acts as a rigid filter. Your mental patterns sift through incoming information, highlight specific details, and physically drive how you behave. Looking closely at this street scene from Chicago in 1906, we can trace the origins of how this was first codified. Amidst this era of heavy industry, a writer named William Walker Atkinson observed that the mind operates with its own kind of mechanical momentum. Atkinson argued that humanity splits into two distinct camps: those who deliberately program their mental filters, and those who allow their environment to dictate their default reactions. If you decline the responsibility of shaping your own perception, the world around you is perfectly willing to build it for you. Atkinson called this default state the passive mind. It is a cognitive autopilot where an individual simply absorbs external triggers and responds with inherited or unexamined routines. Operating entirely in this mode scatters your attention. When you lack a deliberate focus, you become highly susceptible to environmental stress, fear, and erratic behavior. Take a look at this diagram. If you fold a flat plane, you create a crease. The next time life applies pressure, the plane naturally folds along that exact same line. Every repeated reaction deepens the groove, creating a permanent mental pathway. Once that groove reaches a certain depth, the structure takes over. The mind will follow that specific pathway automatically, executing complex behaviors with almost zero conscious intervention. The passive mind itself is entirely neutral. It is simply a highly efficient repository that obediently runs whatever instructions are fed into it most frequently. Leaving this system unguarded strips away your agency. When your entire life is governed by a collection of accidental, unexamined habits, you become a mere passenger in your own existence. Over a century ago, writers used the phrase thought vibration to describe this phenomenon. Strip away the esoteric language of the early 1900s, and what they were actually documenting was cognitive momentum. It is the mechanical process of internal alignment. Your dominant emotional state establishes a baseline pitch. If your attention is constantly tuned to anxiety, you naturally seek out and latch onto circumstances that validate that anxiety. The only tool capable of interrupting this cycle is what Atkinson termed the active mind, or the will. It is the singular faculty capable of generating a fresh, deliberate impulse. Notice how this model works. Instead of fighting old pathways, the active will generates an entirely separate current. It cuts a completely new channel, bypassing the dense network of established habits. As the individual consistently repeats the impulse, the new pathway deepens. Eventually, the active will hands this new structure over to the passive mind, converting a conscious choice into an effortless, automatic routine. Personal power reduces down to a single mechanical function: the ability of your active mind to successfully program your passive mind. Looking at this photograph of a mid-century lecture hall, we see the transition of these concepts from theoretical philosophy to formal, structured instruction. Academic researchers began finding empirical evidence for what the early pioneers had observed. Modern psychology recognizes this exact mechanism under the name schema theory. A schema is a cognitive blueprint, an active framework that sorts and categorizes every single interaction you have throughout the day. This flowchart illustrates the cause and effect chain. Your brain encounters thousands of raw data points every minute, and the schema acts as a strict gatekeeper. Only the data matching the specific shape of your filter is allowed through, which then directly triggers your behavioral response. If the filter is rooted in pessimism, constructive data simply bounces off unseen, but an aligned, intentional filter captures that same data and immediately translates it into actionable steps. This leads to the principle of transmutation. You cannot eliminate a negative schema by fighting it. Wrestling with a thought only feeds it more of your attention. To remove it, you have to starve it of focus while intensely building the opposing pattern. The architecture of your dominant mental state dictates the strict boundaries of what you can perceive and ultimately what you are capable of doing. The transition requires a deliberate pivot. You must move away from a scattered, reactive existence and forcefully step into a state of intentional alignment. Building this capacity involves heavy friction. Developing the active will requires the same repetitive, often uncomfortable diligence as building physical muscle. It demands forcing yourself to perform difficult tasks consistently. Without discipline, people broadcast what psychologists call mixed signals. They hold a conscious desire for success, while their habitual baseline remains anchored in fear. Their momentum stalls out in the turbulence until they snap into a singular, unified direction. Unstoppable momentum is generated only when your emotional state and your logical goals are calibrated to the exact same frequency. True human agency is not about operating without habits. It is the practice of becoming the conscious author of those habits. We are continuously manufacturing our surrounding environment. The raw material is the compounding geometry of our daily attention. Notice the heavy iron of these printing presses. There is no mysticism here. It is relentless machinery. Your mind operates with the exact same mechanical certainty, constantly printing the reality of your life from the plates of your ingrained habits. The output will always match the input. The trajectory of your mental carriage rests entirely on your willingness to reach out, grab the wheel, and start steering today. What you consistently think about shapes how you act. How you act shapes your life.